welcome back to the channel. And today we will be talking about the 10 fetters. And they played a vital role in Maria's awakening process. And we want to dive into that a little bit more. And for starting with the topic, what would you say? What are the fetters? Why are they called fetters, and where do they come from?
Okay. Hi, Sabina. Thank you for introducing that. Yeah, the fetters are the illusions that bind us to suffering, and it's a traditional teaching from the Buddha, where you kind of have a stepwise way of uncovering the various delusions or illusions that create the illusion of a self and its various parts, if you like. And then ninth and 10th fetters are more like the unrealistic beliefs or underlying tendencies that created those fetters in the first place. So I'd say fetters 1 to 8 are all self-referent illusions of varying subtlety or crudity. And usually with this methodology, you have a shift, you break one at a, well, not one at a time, actually. For the first 3 fetters go in one go, usually. The 4th and 5th fetters usually fall together. So yeah, hope that
Okay.
helps.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So how about starting then with the first 3 fetters? Like you said, they tend to fall together. So what are these fetters about?
Yeah, it's probably worth saying first of all that you don't, in this method of of unfettering, we don't usually focus primarily on the 2nd and 3rd fetters because they tend to fall with the first, along with the first. So the first fetter is the illusion of agency of self, who is the experiencer of sensations, the thinker of thoughts, the doer of deeds, decider of decisions, actions, in the controller. It can have these varying aspect. Well, it's how we normally look into it. Actually, it is just a self-illusion that there is a little man in the box or a little woman in the box, who, something that goes by my name. And yeah, and so yeah, this is the primary illusion to look at in a guided inquiry, whether you're guiding yourself or being guided by someone else. The second illusion, the second fetter is doubt. It's called traditionally doubt, which is like this self-referent illusion. Also that there's something about us, this doubting perplexity ability or mechanism, by which when we're exposed to the truth, rather than taking that in, we can resist or deflect it. It's kind of a bit like a cynic, if you like, a sort of inbuilt cynic when confronted with the truth. And then the third fetter is attachment to rites and rituals. So it's as if there's something about us that resonates with pursuing a particular activity. And it's as if doing that activity benefits us, defines us, reinforces the idea of who we think we are. So, it can be religious rituals like confession or meditation or devotional practices, but it can be almost anything that you do, and you feel this resonance of this is who this activity is who I am. I am what I do. Yeah. So that's a brief explanation of all 3. But as I say, when the central illusion or the first illusion of the self is where the other 2 tend to crumble, because if you see that there is no entity controlling, doing, experiencing, thinking, etc., then it doesn't hold up to particularly the third fetter of all those activities that define who you are. If the central illusion has already gone, if you know there is no little man in the little person in the box, then you know that the actions that you do are just what you do, really, not not because of not to support this particular sense of self. And so you might find when this illusion drops that you stop doing a lot of the things that were more, you could say, superstitious, if you like, or based on that feeling of, oh, well, this will protect me. This will, this is the right thing to do because it's part of who I am and must maintain. And doubt is addressed by just being willing to face resistance and look to what is actually true. In the end, you might find that there are these mental constructs that come up and put up a bit of a fight, because they don't want to surrender, if you like, to personalize them a little bit. And yeah, sometimes people do work with those resistances and doubts to make them as conscious as possible in that process is quite helpful. But not to entertain them too much, because in the end, what you're trying to do is to trust your sensory everyday experience above whatever mental constructs you might find arising or coming into this process. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yes, very much. So maybe you could explain a little bit more, like how would one inquire into these fetters and how to break them?
Yeah. Well, from a guiding perspective, I would ask someone, first of all, to make sure that they can distinguish between actual arisings, what's actually happening, and the content of their thinking about what's happening, because this can be a major roadblock otherwise. So some people call that direct experience, but it doesn't have to be necessarily devoid of thinking or signs and symbols, because that's not our everyday experience. We do have thoughts arising as well. The main thing is to be able to distinguish, oh, that's a thought, rather than, oh, the content of that thought is as real as, say, this cup, this yellow cup. We know it's a cup, but yeah. So, very, very simple exercises often, like, imagine a watermelon is a classic one. You can imagine it, you can maybe smell it in imagination, you can maybe see the color in imagination. You can even, you can have quite a strong thought of the watermelon, but can you open your eyes and of course the watermelon isn't there. So it's very simple stuff to just try to first make sure that you're relying on the evidence of the senses rather than the dreamed up, imagined version of whatever's going on. And then I usually get people to start with some really simple stuff, looking at using the senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, touch, smell, taste. So for example, yeah, I mean, is a you part of that experience? Is it seeing an apple, or is it I am seeing an apple? And you repeat that through all the senses. So yeah, it's as if we assume there is an I sitting behind doing or experiencing everything that's going on. And that's the illusion. And so what you're doing is looking at the actual experience in a very sense-based way and seeing whether there really is an experiencer behind the experience. Yeah, so you might ask questions like, where is the seeing happening? Where is the sound sounding? Yeah. And then, what else what might I do? Looking into decisions. So you'd ask someone to just look at those moments of decision making in everyday life. Do I choose that cup or the other cup? When do I get out of bed? You might say, I say to people, to look at how they actually make each decision and see if they can find in that moment a decider or even a decision in itself. Yeah, and of course, people notice, well, all this happens on automatic, and if there's a real decision to be made, normally people don't worry about what cup they made. It's not a problem. Say they had to decide on whether to have an operation or not, and there was a bigger consequence of whatever you did or didn't do. What you might notice is there's a hesitation before actually the choice is made. And yes, it's not that, thinking processes don't come into decision making. It's like we have to use the mental constructs to even devise a shopping list. Never mind decide whether to have an operation. But again, you look at whether there is actually a self at the helm doing that, deciding that, thinking that. And of course, people can never find this self when they look properly. So at some point, there'll be a repetitive rinse and repeat aspect to all these lookings, because it's as if you see it and then but you don't see what you see. If the penny doesn't fully drop necessarily initially. It's not like you just look at something you've done all your life and suddenly go, oh wow, yes, nobody there. Usually it takes quite a bit of repetition and focus for that penny to finally drop. But it usually drops just in an instant, and then it should be, if it's truly the illusion that you've seen through, it should be irreversible, that you never, you're never fooled by it again.
Yeah.
Uh,
So since we're so identified with these mental representations that we created and that we were taught, like this is a cup, and never really questioned that it can be quite an adventure. But once it's seen, it's so clear. Wow, how could I ever not see this?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as if it's in front of your nose all the time, isn't it? That's the feeling when you see through it. You think, how could I have not missed that? How could I have not seen that? It's so obvious.
So once the penny drops, like you said, and there is a kind of a shift, and what is
Yeah.
the shift like when dropping the first three feathers? How do you know that they are gone?
How do you know that they're gone? Yeah, because it won't occur to you in your everyday life anymore. As you go about your everyday life, you won't get that sense that there's somebody in here who's doing it. You will feel free of that, doing it or thinking it, or it's as if you've let me think how to describe it really. I think obviously the experience itself people describe very differently. It can feel like being free suddenly of something that you've had as a bit of a burden. It can feel You can have a sort of very strong experience of, even I had one, where you crash through even the next fetters temporarily, because you don't react anymore to anything, because you're feeling so freed. For some people, it's more of a subtle shift, but what they will find is that they're just, yeah, they're not going to be fooled again. People often use the Santa Claus analogy, but that once you've seen, there isn't a man with a beard who comes down the chimney and it's actually your mum or your dad, or you're never going to think, oh yeah, maybe there is a Santa. And even if you see someone dressed up in the shopping center, shopping mall as a Santa, you're not going to think, well, there he is. Because these are fundamentally beliefs, and sometimes they're not even something you necessarily consciously hold, like a belief in Santa. A belief in a self is so culturally normal that you wouldn't even necessarily know that you hold that assumption. So on one level, it's just a belief that you've actually dispelled, but that dispelling that belief actually changes your experience of life as well, because you're no longer you're no longer feeling of having to protect this fragile thing, this entity. So some self-consciousness may drop away, because you haven't got rid of a reactivity yet, but you might lose a lot of self-consciousness and become a bit more natural, freer, feel freer, feel less maybe things like guilty because you were responsible for something. And then you might see, well, that decision was always going to happen, whatever it was. You probably wouldn't be inclined to, you'd see it as a bit ridiculous probably to engage in many of the rituals you did before, and ways of keeping that self propped up, safe. And you also, I think it's a massive, it's a little step, but it's a massive step, because it opens the door to all the other, allowing all the other illusions to fall away. And as part of that, you might find, even after just breaking the first three fetters, if you read, say you're a Buddhist and you read Buddhist texts, you might understand them for the first time a bit better, because it's your experience. It's not just you thinking about something, or you might see that the teaching is off a bit, particularly if it relates to the first fetters. So it's the beginning of being able to, of independence in the Dharma, as they call it. There is a phrase where you're beginning to no longer need to rely on teachers to understand.
Okay. Yeah, that's profound. It is, yes, it is still the beginning, but I find that it clears the way for exploring all the other feathers, because this big chunk of identification is out of the way. For me, it felt like kind of like a constriction. And when
Right.
that fell, it was so freeing,
Yeah.
like being freed from a prison of the mind. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I very much relate to that. For me, it felt like an amazing, it did feel like being let out of prison. Yeah, exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best analogy I've
So how does it? You already mentioned a few things, but how does that show up in everyday life? Uh, Once these fetters are broken.
I don't think with the first three fetters it has such a profound showing up in everyday life, to be honest. Mainly because, you do still have quite a lot of way to go. You've got the reactions in place, which are the next two fetters, which you know, you might have periods where when you're not reacting, you feel marvelously free, but then you would still be liable to reactivity. So you anything that happens in your life that you don't like what that person said, or you don't like how something's gone at work or whatever, you might still find yourself you might still find yourself reacting just as much as you did previously. So, but yeah, I think you don't take yourself quite so seriously, but your reactions might still be serious, if you know what I mean. So, while you're not holding yourself, while you're holding yourself quite lightly generally, because you've seen that there's no agency. Reactions are reactions. So I don't know if I saw huge changes in my life, but I felt subjectively, it felt much freer experience of life, if you like.
Okay, so anything else you want to add about the first three fetters?
Well, like I said, it's not some perfect state of morality or something, which is how it's, some people have guessed that insight is, it's not a state. I think that's important to say. You're not in any particular state. You don't achieve any particular state. It is very much about an irrevocable, irreversible seeing through, to do with agency, to do with feeling there's a little person experiencing everything, thinking, doing, speaking. And it's an important, it's sometimes called going through the gate. And I think that's because it is literally almost a gateway to being able to then tackle, in a way, more meaty illusions, like the next one's reactivity. So it's important. It's an important milestone.
Yeah. Okay.
And it can, I think one other thing that there are various ways of seeing through. I mean, some people do have this quite spontaneously, as I'm sure you know. Some people seem to see through it in meditative states through meditation. So meditation can be one route. But the way that I've been taught it is through direct pointing. And, I think it can help to be guided through it, because it's very easy to fool oneself about oneself, right? That's the point. And so someone else helping keep your focus and momentum at looking can be very, very helpful.
So if you have listened to this video today and have some questions about the first three fetters, feel free to put them in the comments below. And if you like to have a guide helping you with seeing through the first three fetters, feel free to contact Maria. Thank you, Maria, for giving us insight into this going through the gate important part of the journey, and we will talk some more.
Great, thank you.